Hello, sci-fi world. I am Richard Stanley, the director of Color Oscuro. Yes, today is the European premiere of Color here in Sitges. It's a great honor to be presenting it. My main hope is that the audience are in for a good time. I think it is a film that nobody can be expecting because it makes so many left-of-field choices that so far people's initial reaction has been pretty much what the fuck, and they've been super confused. But I'm also noticing that as we've played it a few times in America, that people have been coming back already to the cinema. And I noticed by the second or third screening in America, they were passing out hash cookies and taking various strange edible drugs. So I'm thinking that it's a film which is definitely finding its audience. Well, I think maybe the most important part of Color is to try to open people's eyes to the larger Lovecraftian universe. H.P. Lovecraft said that all of his work strives towards an atmosphere of cosmicism or cosmic horror, the sense of mankind's smallness in the face of the impartial universe, in the face of infinity. And I think his themes are more terrifying and more relevant now than ever. So I wanted to update the material and try to reconnect it to a contemporary audience. I have back home a plush Cthulhu doll that I sleep with in my bed, which is cute. And I was sure that whatever happened, that the mythos, that the Lovecraftian realms in this film should not be cute, that it should be as terrifying and implacable as it was in the day he wrote it. The first thing I did was I tried to bring it into the present and connect it with themes which, such as the destruction of the traditional way of life, the American family facing obliteration, and a future that is very, very unclear in a world which is now mutating beyond our control. And at the same time, I wanted to address some of Lovecraft's nihilism. He fears or hates the human race. He's a great misanthrope. In all of his stories, he has almost no human characters. And this misanthropy in his work tilts into elements that are very unpleasant of racism and misogyny. So by introducing human beings into this landscape, I immediately knew I would have to, in the first scene, introduce a gentleman of color, the first black student from Miskatonic University, and a strong female lead, because you would never find these in the traditional Lovecraft story. And all of the victims of the color I wanted to base on my own family. I wanted to base Teresa on my mother. I have a nephew in real life named Benny, who is much like the kid who was torn down the well. I'm very similar to Jack, the little boy who is doing the crayon drawings of monsters while his parents are going crazy. And I thought by seeing the destruction of my own loved ones and my own family, it would personalize the threat and bring me closer to the true horror of the original story. I started very young with Lovecraft. Lovecraft was my mother's favorite writer, and she read me stories from his work when I was 7 or 8 years old. And by the time I was 13, I think I'd already read all of the main stories and already was thinking Color Out of Space might be good to adapt, just because it is set on a farm in Massachusetts, and it is not set on Venus or in Antarctica like Mountains of Madness or at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. But the fact that it was accessible made me think that of all the stories, it may have been one of the easier ones to get near. Also, it was H.P. Lovecraft's favorite story of his own work, which meant that it made it was a good example of the work to go after. And over the years, it became more personal. My mother died of cancer, of lymphoma, very slowly because she was very strong. It took her a long time to die. And in the course of these 10 years, it destroyed slowly her mind and her personality, and then gradually her body. And during this time, of course, I read to her and read again most of the works of H.P. Lovecraft, which was, I guess, my way of turning it in a full circle. And this feeds back into the movie, which is very concerned with death, with the destruction of our loved ones, and our inability to do anything about it. That in the face of it, we cannot save them, we cannot prevent death or the annihilation of everything that we hold dear. So I wanted to, in my way, address those themes. Possibly one of the most disturbing or terrifying things about Lovecraft's work is that 100 years later, we are seeing that in some ways he was a prophet. There are many ideas in the original stories from the 1920s that seemed insane or bizarre at the time, which now modern science is increasingly finding more and more evidence for. I mean, a good example is he talks about non-Euclidean geometry, alien geometry. And when I was at school, I used in an essay this idea of non-Euclidean geometry, and I remember the teacher put a big red mark around it and said there is no such thing, that all geometry is Euclidean. But this is not true. Now we have, in chaos science, we have fractal geometry. And not only that, we use this fractal geometry to create VFX. We use algorithms to create our computer animation. We had no way of describing it in the 1920s, but now we know that chaos has a pattern, and that chaotic motion, like waves and storms, have within them a sense of order. There is a form or an order to chaos, which I think Lovecraft only is able to guess at or hint at. And he was attempting to link supernatural ideas from witchcraft and Gothic fantasy to quantum mechanics and to modern science. And it's the same with notions of ultra-dimensional or otherworldly intrusions into our world. I tried to visualize the color by thinking that the human visual range exists between infrared and ultraviolet. That something we can't see would be perceived by us as an ultraviolet blur, or maybe a sharp sound in our ear. But something which dips into ultrasound and infrasound. Our soundtrack attempts to do that, to go to dip beyond the human auditory range, which are all ideas which I think were utterly alien in 1927 when the story was written. But now in the 21st century, they seem less far-fetched. Color Out of Space is probably the first Lovecraft adaptation to really do justice in any ways to his core themes. We tried super hard to create a film which would somehow convey the essence of his stories. And after playing this to the Lovecraft community and to many of the critics and authors who work in this field, I'm content that we have achieved, I think, the first step towards really visualizing the Lovecraftian universe. And I hope that this turns the key on a lot of other projects, because I'd like to see more. I would like to see the Del Toro Mountains of Madness or the James Wan Call of Cthulhu, and all of these projects that have been stalled for years that have not reached us. In the film itself, there are a number of moments which I'm super proud of, because color, I think, translates my screenplay to screen more successfully than any of the other adaptations of my own work that I've been involved with. And certainly the closing reel of the film, I think, propels us into an extremely alien universe that's very different from anything that I've seen on screen before.